So let's start by describing this, the general somatic receptors. This is what we're going to start describing now. Now, in anatomy, we have a lot of classifications, and we're going to classify these receptors depending on their function, that is, what are they detecting, and depending on their structure. In this video, we're only going to talk about the functional classification. So remember, a receptor is a sensor, is a detector. Those sensors, detectors that you probably have at home uh, that can detect smoke, right, and activate the alarm, that's a sensory. That's how sensory receptors work in our body. Uh, so let's describe these peripheral receptors. It is cool. We have these peripheral receptors can be the very same. Let me show you here. Remember that sensory neuron that we were describing. I'm going to put it here. The sensory neuron that is located on, well, you understand me a bit later maybe if you don't understand this drawing. But this is the sensory neuron located in the dorsal root. What happened here? Okay, in the dorsal root ganglion. The dendrites, which are the endings of this sensory neuron, can act as a receptor by itself. And they're generally spread in the body, and they can detect the general sensations, which is, again, touch, temperature, vibration, pressure, and I think I'm missing some. So receptors can be like that, free endings, or they can be cells, specialized cells that has the function to detect the stimuli. Most of these specialized receptor cells are located in special organs or special senses, like vision, taste, hearing. These receptors are not going to be, again, covered in here, but I want you to know that they exist. They are cells that can detect a stimulus, okay? Now, depending on where, in which part of the body we are going to locate or find that receptor, we can classify it into, well, by the location of the receptor. And then we have another classification of receptors depending of what is the stimulus type that they detect or they sense. Okay, so let's start with the location of the receptors. Receptors can be located on the surface of the body, right? In the skin, and we call them exteroceptors or exteroreceptors. And what do you think they're detecting? Things occurring in the external environment. Now we have also interoceptors or interoreceptors. And they are located inside our visceral organs. And those are the ones detecting or monitoring changes that happens inside the body, in the internal environment. But we're leaving something here that is not in the viscera and is not in the surface. We're leaving behind in here the skeletal muscles, the joints, and the tendons. They have proprioceptors. And these proprioceptors or proprioreceptors, they detect changes in the level or how stretch or contract a muscle, a tendon, or a joint capsule is. So in that way, it can inform the central nervous system about our body position and body movement, etc. We'll describe that later. Now, depending on the stimulus, look all the different stimulus that we are exposed to. And remember, well, not remember, just take into account that all of these receptors by location, exteroreceptors, interoreceptors, and some proprioceptors can detect each of these stimulus that I'm going to described now. And the same way, each of these stimulus, for example, temperature, can be as well as can be detected by stereoceptor, interoceptor, or proprioceptors. Exteroceptors only can detect all of these different stimulus. So it's like a mix and match. There's no one-on-one matching or correspondence in here. So how can we classify these receptors depending of the stimulus type, what they are going to detect? So first, we have the first group in here. They are mechanoreceptors. And the mechanoreceptors detect or respond or are activated when they detect a mechanical or a physical change on the surface. Remember, they can be extero, intero, or interoreceptors. So when you, for example, touch is a type of mechanoreceptors, the receptors that detect touch. And as you touch, you're deforming, right? Or pressure, which is deeper, you're deforming the surface, okay? And that deformity or that change in the physical structure of the receptor is what activates these receptors. Then we have thermoreceptors. What do you think they respond to? They respond to changes in temperature, like your AC. Okay, so and they are programmed, our thermoreceptors, to be activated at a certain temperature, cold and heat or hot temperatures. Then we have chemoreceptors. They respond to chemical substances. So they can be located external and interoreceptors in the surface or internally, and they detect changes, for example, of sodium concentration in our body. So they send that information to the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus, depending on that, can decide. It knows your sodium concentration and your level of hydration, and it will make you drink or not more water to adjust the sodium concentration. Concentration of, I don't know, acid, your acidic concentration in your stomach is detected by chemoreceptors and sends their information to the central nervous system. Central nervous system analyzes and says, this is too acidic, let's stimulate other cells to drop down that level of acidic substances or decreasing the pH. What else? Photoreceptors. What do you think they respond to? Photo means light, so they respond to light, and they are located only on the eye. And last but not least, nociceptors or nociceptors, and they respond to pain. So what is pain? Pain is an experience that carries both a sensory information, right, but also an emotional. It's linked. We have a sensory emotional experience going on in here. And this is explained because this information, when it ascends, enters the central nervous system, ascends the spinal cord, gets to the thalamus, and from there the thalamus, remember, is the router. It sends us not only to the sensory cortex and the cerebrum, but it also sends that information, for example, to the hippocampus, the limbic system, which deals with our emotions. It sends us to the prefrontal lobe, so it changes immediately. Our personality changes right there when we are exposed to any type of painful stimulus. It sends the information also to the hypothalamus, and well, I already said that, but from there to the posterior part of the hypophysis, which deals with the autonomic nervous system and our fight and flight response. So it's a very complicated pathway, the one that sends the pain information to our brain. And these receptors responds to pain, they respond to the physical tissue damage, but also respond to chemical changes chemical changes to a certain level, they can activate nociceptors or can turn into a pain stimulus. Same thing with temperature. Now, these nociceptors can be or are present in the surface of the skin, but we also have nociceptors in our viscera, except the central nervous system and your lungs. And maybe other organs that we, this is not such a, again, a lot of research going on right now, but we have so, or we know so little about the nervous system. There are proprioceptors, there are nociceptors also in the nociceptors that we don't know so well what is the function of that. Now, from these receptors, the pain information is sent to the nervous system following. Remember, I told you most of these in previous chapters, most of this sensation is sent to the nervous system following sensory fibers that are slow, unmyelinated fibers, unmyelinated axons. 70% of the information, the nociception, is sent following that way. But of course, we need also some kind of pain information that has to be delivered right away, especially when where they're responding to changes in temperature, when we're being burned, or changes in when physical damages or physical tissue damage. For example, when you're cutting, I don't know, an apple, and then you went from the apple to your skin, and you rapidly stop that. That information about pain, nociception, is being sent by myelinated, big, fat, almost 2 millimeters axons to the central nervous system, so they can reach rapidly the spinal cord and create the reflex arc and the withdrawal reflex, remember, so we can withdraw our limb from that painful stimulus. So this is maybe a little bit too much that are included in here. Of course, that part of nociception is not going to be included in your exams, but it's a cool way to understand these receptors, okay? So in the next video, I'm going to describe now the structural classification of receptors. And here's how they work, what they do, where they are located. In the next one, we're going to see how do they look like, okay? See you.